Hello, welcome to CHM. Thank you. Well, our mission here is about decoding technology for everyone, our computing past, our digital present, and the future impact so that we can help shape a better future. So what better topic than today to focus on emoji for everyone. It's a fun topic, but it also has serious issues behind it. We'll be exploring it all. And in that spirit of diversity and inclusion, I want to recognize that today is International Women's Day, right? So, thank you. And it just happens by chance that our panel is a remarkable group of all women. So, did you know that according to a recent survey done by Adobe, actually, emoji are used by more than 92% of the world's online population. But only 41% of the US emoji users say that they feel like their identities, 41% say they're not adequately represented in the current roster. So tonight we thought it'd be great to explore how people are actually moving the needle and making a change. How through their activism, through their creativity, through their hard work, that they are ensuring that emoji reflect a broader array of lived experience, of identities, of culture and community. We'll also to consider how emoji lie at the crossroad of technology and creative expression. Of course, we invite you to join the conversation. You'll find some cards if you're here in the auditorium. Feel free to write a question on it, and in the middle of the program, a staff member will come pick them up. And if you're joining us on Zoom, welcome as well. Feel free to use the Q&A feature to add your questions for the conversation. I'm happy to share that tonight, we are opening a new lobby pop-up exhibit. It's called Little Emoji, Big Story. This is what it looks like. Led by our Vice President of Collections Exhibitions, Kirsten Tashef, who's here. This is a collaboration with a designer, artist, and diversity advocate, Ying Liu, who's one of our featured panelists. And in this exhibit, you can learn about where emoji come from, meet some of the amazing people behind the emoji story who are advocating for diversity and inclusion. So, and as part of the fun, if you'd like, you can grab some of these downstairs and get your picture taken, post to your favorite social channel, and you be part of your story with your favorite emoji. So, as is tradition, I'll introduce our speakers using 5 numbers. Let's meet our panel. First, we have Jennifer Aitley. 2 books published, 8 nonprofit boards that she serves on, 50 states traveled to, plus the District of Columbia, 89101, do you know which one that one is her official residence zip code, and 5 separate professional email accounts. She's an entrepreneur, a documentary film producer, a journalist, seed investor, and emoji activist. In fact, tonight we'll be featuring several clips from her documentary film, Emoji Story. She's the founder of Emoji Nation, a grassroots group whose motto is emoji by the people, for the people. And previously, she also served as vice chair of the Unicode Emoji Subcommittee. Please give a very warm welcome to Jennifer Aitley. Jenny, so good to have you here. All right, let's next meet Rayouf Almeri. Here are her 5 numbers. 30 articles published in art and fashion history, 4 countries lived in, 2 collaborations for representation in beauty and health products. 2017 was the year that she was listed as one of Time's most influential teens. And 17,458 tweets in the last 7 days that mentioned her hijab emoji. Yeah, so as a 16-year-old high school student, she founded the Hijab Emoji Project to push for digital representation for millions of Muslim women around the world. She's also named as Time's most influential teen, one of her teens, and also Forbes 30 Under 30 at age 17. Currently a senior at Stanford in product design. Please give a very warm welcome to Rayouf Almeri. Great to have you here, Rayouf. Next, let's meet Ying Liu. So here are her 5 numbers. 258 companies that she's created corporate brands and campaigns for. 4 continents lived on, 21 countries where she's traveled to speak about cross-cultural creativity, 4,201 Facebook friends, including me, and 6 Unicode emojis that she's created. She's an award-winning artist, an entrepreneur, speaker, and she currently serves as a commissioner on the San Francisco Arts Commission In addition to her emoji, she's created the Twitter fail whale, Conan O'Brien pale whale, and the Chinese-style Mickey Mouse used for the Disney Shanghai opening. Please give a very warm welcome to Ying Lu. So good to have you here. Now, who would be a great moderator? We're really thrilled that here to moderate our conversation is Sarah Dean. She's an architect and a designer in the Bay Area, internationally exhibited. Her work investigates opportunities for digital technologies to engage cities for greater equity and adaptability. She's an assistant professor at the California College of Arts. Please welcome Sarah Dean. Glad you're here, Sarah.
So I think we're going to start with a clip. We have some, we're going to be talking about a huge range of things tonight. And sprinkled with that within, we're going to have some clips from the Emoji story. So I think we're starting with a clip.
The consortium is composed of people from all the world's biggest companies. Our primary goal is representing all the world's languages so that they work on computers and smart devices. Before Unicode, the world we lived in, it was a mess.
You had a set of codes that you would use for German. You had a set of codes you'd use for Japanese. You had a set of codes you'd use for Chinese. You couldn't really match them.
Ideally, if I were to write you, you wouldn't get a question mark, you wouldn't get a square box, you wouldn't get something unreadable. That's what Unicode is all about, making the languages of the world work on all those smart devices. And often as part of writing systems, there are symbols. Emoji are new and rather different symbols.
Emoji started out in Japan. Cell phone carriers at that time were having problems because each implementation of emoji were different. So when one person would maybe send a heart to their girlfriend, the girlfriend would see some weird symbol. We decided, okay, we will incorporate these pictographic symbols into Unicode.
So now if I text you a lizard, what you see on your screen hopefully will be a lizard, something you understand to be a lizard, and look fairly much like a lizard.
With emoji, unlike established languages, we're evaluating something that's really being invented. We get hundreds of proposals, but we only encode 60 emoji a year.
So emoji are really part of language and really encoded in the way we communicate across the globe. Can we just start out with a story of why you went down this path to make an emoji? Why emoji?
I can start. It was kind of funny because I moved here to Silicon Valley in 2015. And in 2015, Jenny A. Lee messaged me on iPhone that she's throwing a dumpling party. And I was about to message her back, and I realized there was no dumpling emoji. So I thought, well, I'm a designer, I have imagination, and why don't we do something? So I went back to my table, I created the very first early version of the dumpling emoji. It's actually an animated GIF or GIF. It has like heart eye and it blinks, and we call it the bling bling dumpling. I sent it back to her, and she said, "Did you make that?" I was like, "Yeah." And then she said, "Okay, why don't we publish this?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" And the next thing you know, she went down to a rabbit hole. She was doing research and find out that Unicode Consortium, which is a nonprofit based in Silicon Valley, who's actually responsible for all these emojis on everybody's phone. And the next thing you know, she went over there and had a meeting with the entire community. And I think she can mention a little bit about her experience, her first experience went to the Unicode.
Yeah, so why did we go down this rabbit hole? So first of all, let's just agree that like dumplings are like a universal food. Like sometimes it's called ravioli, sometimes it's called empanada, sometimes it's called khinkali, sometimes it's called pierogi. But this idea of like yummy goodness inside a carbohydrate shell, whether or not baked or steamed or fried, totally universal, right? And then the idea is like emoji are universal. So the fact that there was no emoji for dumpling, literally I was like, the system is broken. And and then I was like, I'm gonna fix it. I knew nothing. I mean, I was not a big emoji user. So I literally was like, where do emoji come from on Google? And you land on the Unicode page, and then you spend a lot of time reading. And I think you probably went through a very similar process, yeah. So you're like, okay, at that time, so 2015, there were these, 12 large companies, 9 of which were US multinational tech companies, and they paid $18,000 a year to have full voting privileges on the Unicode consortium. And I was like, I multiply, it was like 18,000 times, like 10-ish or whatever. Like I was like, oh, someone could take over like Emoji for like $200,000, but which I did not have. But there was like this really interesting loophole, which is for $75 you could join as an individual, no voting power, but you could show up at the meeting and you could be on the email list. So, I think within a couple of weeks of my going down this rabbit hole, they sent out this like RSVP, like who wants to come? I was like, oh, it's in Sunnyvale. Am I going to be there? So I took Caltrain and went to Sunnyvale. It was an Apple building, and I don't know what I thought. I think I thought it would be something like this, sort of like a congressional kind of shape. A lot of people, people on stage, microphones, whatever. It is not. It is people in a conference room, and they skew older, white, and male, and engineering. But they were so nice. They were like, what brings you here? We're so happy to see you. Tell us about yourself. And it totally had the vibe of like going to church, like really nice old white people. and then we just started down this journey. And then just watching them kind of talk, and I was like, debating about beans and like milk. Is it a carton of milk? Is it, and I was just like, I can't believe this global visual language is filtered through the lens of Silicon Valley engineers only. Yeah. And then that's why we decided to create Emoji Nation, like emoji for the people, by the people. And it's sort of, the idea of bringing the voice of the people to the room, now the Zoom mostly. And then we just started, like, she had a registered domain and we're like, let's go. and actually now I think over 130 of the emoji on your keyboard have come through us in some way, including the hijab emoji.
Tell us your story.
My story heavily involves Jenny Lee, of course, but I think the initial interaction with why I thought the headscarf was best suited for emoji as medium was so natural for me as a Gen Zer. I think it's the easiest way to communicate with the least friction. So that was the first thought I had. But initially, the way the idea came about is I was on a group chat with a few of my friends who didn't wear the headscarf, and we decided to name the group chat Emojis of ourselves. And obviously, at the time in 2015-16, there wasn't one that represented me. So the way I hacked the system was I took an emoji of a turban guy wearing a turban and a girl and did an arrow together, and that became a quasi-hijab emoji in my sense. But that sparked the thought of, why isn't there one to represent the around 500 million women that wear the headscarf? So I entered the rabbit hole falsely. Initially, I sent a customer service email to Apple, and I was like, hey guys, this is really bad, you gotta fix it. And I realized, obviously, that's not the right way. And that Unicode consortium was at the heart of it all. So that was kind of my journey to creating the hijab emoji.
Amazing. And just very briefly, it's such a weird process because it's such a kind of corporate entity in a way, or a nonprofit and corporate entity. What are some unexpected moments that you had, or like one interesting moment in this whole process, from design to the application to the approval process? What's something unexpected that people might not think about the emoji process?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because when I initially designed the dumpling emoji, it was around the same time the Unicode consortium and also Jenny, they sort of come back to me and said, well, we also have a lot of people sort of vouching for the chopstick, the fortune cookie, and the takeout box. And would you like to also do that? And so I did the initial design. That was around 2015. And it was around the same time I was working at 500. So like in our office, everybody loves boba tea. So I just thought, well, I'm doing these, food emoji anyway. Why don't I just kind of sneak in the boba tea emoji? And we also had a bunch of friends who co-write the proposal together, but it was rejected when we submitted all the emojis together in early 2016. So in early 2016, the dumpling, the chopstick, the fortune cookie, and the takeout box were all accepted, but the boba tea was rejected. The unexpected reason why it was rejected was because there was not enough data to prove the importance. And it was, can you believe it? There was not enough data to prove the importance of boba tea. And this was 2015, so I was devastated. So I was like, I can't really do much about it. I don't have any data to back up. So the boba tea emoji at the time was a failed proposal. And little do I know, 3 years later, there was 3 data scientists. 2 were students from computer science, and they happened to be data scientists. And they emailed me out of nowhere. Like, I got this email and said that, Yiying, we know that you have submitted the emoji back in 2016. It was rejected. But we happen to have data that we got from Google Analytics. They're all open data. We have like this long projection of how much boba tea is gonna worth. Like it's a the $2 billion business projection in the next 5 years. And they did comparison of boba with matcha and red wine. And it was incredible. And it was all because of Google data. And so I was so excited, and that's how we ended up so we collaborated together and made a new proposal, and finally the boba tea became available in 2020, 5 years after its initial rejection.
Yeah.
Yes.
I will also add, so somewhere along this journey, I also became a member of the Unicode emoji subcommittee, so I became part of the infrastructure, and then also somewhere in there became a vice chair. But what was interesting, I will say this, the fact that there are a lot of Asian American women now in high-ranking places in Silicon Valley multinational tech companies that are on the Unicode consortium is important, because they love boba tea and can be in the room and advocate, because other people who are, let's say, not Asian, not women, and do not drink boba, looked at the designer is that parfait? And you're like, how can you say that, right? So the demographics of who's in the room when you're discussing things can matter. So I just want to say, yay for, you definitely can see sort of the impact of that in the boba. I remember specifically.
That's a great point. I think I guess the question is, what was the most...
An interesting moment or an unexpected moment in the process.
I think the most rudimentary level would be just a shock at how bureaucratic a process is, and I think it's something that no one thinks about, is something exists on your phone and you accept it and you move on. So that moment that I had where I was like, oh, for me to make this happen, I need to pull up Google Analytics data and prove that the hijab emoji is not transient, that it will be frequently used, and pull out little data points. So that was the most, first interaction with the experience. But then I think specific to an emoji like the headscarf, something that unfortunately has driven so much contention in the last few years, was how political emoji could be. That was something that completely surprised me. I was receiving hate from Austrian politicians where I was living at the time, saying, oh, this is insanity. And I was kind of happy. I was like, okay, you don't make change if everyone is happy. And I upset some people, so that definitely did make me happy, ironically. But I think that was really interesting to me, is it kind of opened my eyes on how emoji could serve as a form of open dialogue, because some way it validates the idea that, okay, if there is a permanent way of showing this group, they almost mean something now. That's kind of what was interesting to me.
Really literal visibility.
Exactly.
That sets up our next clip perfectly. So let's roll the next clip.
Well, my daughter introduced me to it. She came home, she says, it sure would be nice to be able to send an emoji to my friend that looks like me. I said, oh, really? I said, that sounds great. What is an emoji? After I did the research, there are trillions of these that are sent by way of text messaging every year all over the world, and they were all Caucasian. And if you're sending these images to people and they all look like somebody else, it's it just doesn't make you feel good. You do it because that's the only option you have. I said, this is a huge opportunity to represent everybody. I said, I'm not gonna just do one, I'm gonna do 5 skin tones. When I gave my presentation there, it was folks just sitting around a table, and I was real adamant about what would be acceptable. And the whole room got quiet. And they said to me, no one was taking diverse emojis seriously until you came and gave your presentation. You touch the screen and the 5 skin tones pop up. You let the user decide what color representation that they're interested in. I didn't realize it would be so impactful, but it has been.
Really incredible. Yeah. It's a really powerful clip. And all 3 of you have worked really deliberately and for a long time now on creating more global and inclusive emoji. So I guess, to look forward first, how can we continue to build inclusion in emoji? What are things that we can't see yet to build on being visible? And what are other ways that we can be more global?
Anyone?
I can start. I think I can use the chopstick emoji as an example because this is such a great question. I think it's really wonderful to have more representations from people from different ethnic backgrounds, but in the same time, I'm also looking at different age groups too. Because when I designed the chopstick emoji, initially the design was actually 2 sticks in parallel. No, actually the 2 stick in parallel, I didn't want to do it because it looks like a drumstick. So I just put it across together like this. And I presented in 2016 in person at IBM at the UTC, which is Unicode Technical Committee meeting. It sounded so nerdy now that I'm saying it. But at the time when I was presenting it, we had people from around the world of the Unicode Consortium chime in real time. So we had Bobby, who's living in Taiwan. He's my uncle's age. He chimed in. And he said, the crossed chopstick is actually impolite in a lot of Asian countries, especially in Japan and China. In certain area, it actually means very impolite things. You can look it up. So I went back. I had no idea. Even though I was born and raised in Shanghai, half of my life was growing up in Asia. I didn't know about this. A lot of etiquettes, a lot of traditions, sort of gradually disappearing if we don't practice it, if we don't tell the next generation. So I did my research. I went back, I searched on the internet, I went back to the library, and I realized this is actually something quite broad. This is not a small tradition in certain area. It's actually quite a wide etiquette that we need to carry on. So I uncrossed the chopsticks, and that's how the chopstick we are using today. And it was because of Bobby. I think we know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know, which is our blind spot. And this is where you need people from different geographic location and also different age groups to chime in for the conversation.
So I'm gonna make 2 separate points. So one is this generation of little people, like toddlers. My niece is 3.5, and they can quote read and write emoji before they can read and write their native language, right? So you can text grandma unicorns and flowers or whatever. So, but before they can write and before they can read. So it's really interesting because I think it will wire a certain generation differently. And it's also very interesting because therefore things that are on your palette of what you can say matter. So you can see like a mate emoji, you can see a hijab emoji, you can see, you know, a sari. There, you can see an arepa. Like, so in your world, your introduction of like written communication, what is on the emoji keyboard, even if you never see it physically, you know in some way it matters. So that's one point, that one of the reasons we care about what is in this global visual curated language is that which is curated can be said. So that's the first point. Second point, there's a lot of interesting, one of the most like interesting things that's been happening in our standardization of emoji is with gender, because a lot of the, so just to give you some context, a lot of the emoji that were originally in the first set that kind of popped up in 2010 are ones that were introduced by, or were legacy ones that kind of descended from the Japanese set. So as of 2015, okay, just wanted to say, as of, not anymore, but as of 2015, there are many ways that you could have like a job or a role as a male. Like you could be a police officer, you could be, you know, a detective, you could be a Buckingham Palace guard, I don't know what, you know, you could even be Santa Claus, you know, but there were 4 jobs that you could have as a woman. So it was dancer, princess, Playboy bunny, and bride. Those were the 4 jobs that you could see. And to, you know, this became a whole thing, and, you know, there was like videos, and there were op-eds in the New York Times and whatnot. And so eventually there was a group within Google that actually did the proposals and like, let's make them like professors and astronauts and programmers and you know, farmers. So that whole set came. And then you had to have the male occupations to match those. So that was kind of lovely. But then we kind of went through this whole thing where this is actually a very interesting thing about language. The word adult, baby, there's doctor or teacher, there's no gender implied in it. In fact, they kind of combine, they're abstract enough, they kind of combine the gender. But for a while there, if you were choosing a teacher or a police officer or a doctor, you had to pick either the male or the female version. Like there wasn't like sort of a abstract one. So then we introduced the gender neutral one, where you had to draw it so like it was like not clear whether it was like going to be it skewed male or skewed female. So then we went through all of those, and then we went through, this is interesting, like gender neutral versions of like mermaid and merman. So there's now merperson, which was really interesting to draw, like, right? Because like, you know, so there was, you know, versions where like they had like their arms crossed in front of their chest, and the Apple version they're wearing a little tunic. So that was sort of an interesting. Then like gender neutral. So there's Santa Claus, and then we had introduced Mrs. Claus, and then now there's MX Claus. It's actually officially in Unicode, like MX Claus. So it's sort of a gender neutral, like holiday goodwill North Pole dwelling person, you know. So, but then if you keep on looking, they basically, or we, I guess, have introduced male and female versions of it. So, man with a beard, woman with a beard, man in a tux, woman in a tux, woman in a bride's dress, man in a bride's dress, pregnant woman, pregnant man. Like, so it's been really interesting to see the gender kind of framework applied across like basically everything. So, and especially interesting during, you know, this very active era of debate and pronouns and whatnot, and how in some ways Unicode, by being neutral and being very even-handed, sort of can be perceived by some people as like taking a position.
Well, it's interesting in developing a language. It's like you really are going through all the processes of developing a language. And then also, how do you allow that to evolve? And when it's pictorial, how do you have ambiguity? Very difficult.
Oh, family disaster of a like very abstract concept that can be rolled into one word. If you fracture it, you know, in some permutations, we're looking at 3,500, but we can't, because that's just like more emojis than anything. So that has definitely been a watch this space. Something's gonna happen with the family emoji, because right now, at least in Apple world, part of the concern is that you can at this point only sort of apply one skin tone to a group. It's not quite exactly like that, but part of the concern is you don't want to apply that families can only be one color. So at least Apple has only yellow, that like Simpsons yellow thing going on, which is its own like debate and controversy or whatnot. But
I think we should show the next clip, and then we'll start the question again with Rauf.
You know, if you look, the history of people putting little pictures inline in their text, I mean, it has a very long history. If you look here, this is from the Book of Kells, which is an Irish medieval manuscript of the Christian Gospels. And there's all these little inline pictures in the text, like these mythical Irish creatures, just kind of like Emoji today, except much more beautiful. So the idea that we'd limit ourselves to, to the Unicode ones, it just seems like we're setting our sights a bit low. The fact that you can't even use an emojum that's not, on the official list, like, that's crazy. The internet was founded in part on a sort of libertarian ethos. Everyone should be able to do sort of what they want. And so what I think consistent with that ethos would be a world where anyone could send whatever inline pictures they want. I mean, people say, oh, emoji, it's a new emerging language. You've heard people say that. But if it's really a new emerging language, it shouldn't be controlled by some committee in San Jose, California of like predominantly white, predominantly male text encoding geeks, right? It's not a good way to run a language.
I think we were just saying that. Yeah. So in looking forward and thinking big about, how we communicate in the world and how we represent ourselves and how we want to, empower each other through this format, what do you think emoji can do that language can't do? What is it that emoji's adding or could, in its future form, add to the way that we communicate?
I think my first gut reaction is it saves time. I think it says a bazillion things in one. Instead of writing 50 words to describe how you're feeling, sometimes an emoji can do the work for you. So I think in that nature, it saves time. That's the power of it, is it can evoke things that you may not be even able to explain. And then I think when it comes to emojis that represent identity, I think it's a form of almost resistance or a form of pride. I know I see the hijab emoji being used on the bios of fashion hijabi bloggers or just like random people who identify as hijabi. So it's kind of like a marker of like, hey, this is who I am, this is how I want to be perceived. So I think it's like a power of like control over how you're perceived a little bit. At least that's how I've seen it in social media. So that's kind of the twofold ways I think it can really be important. It's so practical. I mean, I don't know anyone that doesn't use emoji, and also it stands on its own as an identifier.
That was great. I personally think there's two things emoji has done for the community. First of all, I love food, and I'm so honored that I was able to contribute to the small businesses. And especially, I think there's a lot of small businesses struggling during COVID, and even now it's sort of gradually post-COVID. It's still sort of recovering. But what I heard from some of the boba tea owners and dumpling owners, like stop owners, they said that in a way, it's contributing as a marketing tool. It helps small business to get more visibility on the keyboard. When you're hungry, you're like, hey, I want sushi, I want a vegetarian salad or whatnot. You can use emojis, and in a way, I think it contributes to the business. The other thing I really appreciated is I heard from a friend of mine whose father is a lawyer. And she was saying that her father, before emoji existed, he's very careful, very deliberate of using words, right? Because that's what he does every day, contracts. But as soon as he discovered there's emojis on his keyboard, he started to use emojis and all that sort of different, and the whole family was able to see a very different side of Dad, which I think it's very liberating to see that emoji allow people to get in touch with their inner child, to get in touch with their true self. And to me, I think that's the beauty of art, and that's the beauty of visual communication, and that's also the beauty of combining art and technology. So that's my 2 cents on emoji.
It's wonderful.
So, you know, I've sat on the Unicode emoji subcommittee, and one of the things that you see, like the system to a certain degree used to very much reward people who were like super passionate about certain things, and so the people who were passionate. So there was the hijab emoji, there was redheads, there were bald people, there were blonde people, there was curly hair. So that's actually one of the interesting things. Still trying to represent like afros. There's big debate about that's what curly hair was supposed to do. Instead of kind of just the way that Apple interpreted is not necessarily, doesn't thrill everyone. And I was just like, then skin tones and gender, non-binary, whatever. And it really struck me finally when I talked to a linguist who explained like, okay, what is emoji good at? They're good at nouns which are objects. So, like any kind of food, balls, whatever, like not necessarily good like ambition. Ambition is not something you can express well in emoji. It's good at verbs which are motion, so running, walking, swimming. Certain kinds of adjectives it can be kind of good at, usually by reflecting them through animals. So like elephant is big, mouse is small. But for the longest time, what it could not let you express was the word I and the word you. And so I thought that was so fascinating when she pointed that out. We've actually now sort of like maybe crack the word you. There is now a finger, there's like now a finger that kind of points at you. That I want to say, someone in the public just submitted that. And we're like, oh my God, finally, that can say you. I mean, and I have to say Unicode Consortium, I mean, much as like, we kind of criticize like, these large multinational tech companies that are based in the United States, the Unicode is an open process, which is kind of remarkable. Like normal people can like find the page, find a proposal and just submit. And so I feel like people in trying to really emphasize, the emoji that looks like them or whatever, they're trying to say the word I, but haven't been able to. And so in many cases, when you see someone has an emoji in their like Instagram handle or their Twitter, name, that allows them to express themselves. For me, the one I like is she's in a purple dress and she has like like the black haircut and she's like, that's the one I like. That's the one that kind of I use to relate. But I benefit in that kind of world because emoji started in Japan, which is like not too far from like the China-ish area that my parents are from. So I felt very well represented in that world, but not everyone is. And it's hard because there are so many permutations. I wouldn't be surprised if the solution in the long term is some kind of system that allows you to do custom inline graphics, right? Because the idea of emoji, it's not just it's like a picture. It's a picture that can be in the subject line of an email, right? This is actually text, yeah.
So I want to give a last check to the audience of if you have any questions, to raise them up in the air, and if you're on Zoom and have questions, to put them in the chat so that they can be gathered, because pretty soon we're going to start answering audience questions. And I just want to, while we're getting our questions, I'm loving all these stories, and I think that's, obviously emoji are about stories, right? Like all of our stories and being able to tell stories more fluidly than language and all the things it does. Do you have any great stories about people impacted by your emoji that you've heard? I love the story of business owners. That's one that would not have occurred to me. And of course, like now you're on the map. Your food is represented. Do you have other stories of impacted people?
I think one of the most heartwarming stories I've had is I was walking in the central part of Vienna, just on an errand or something, and I passed the Apple store that's about to open, but they're still under construction, and I see somebody waving at me aggressively, and I'm like, I look at her and I'm like, I don't know you, why are you waving at me? And then she runs out of the store and she's like, oh my gosh, I know you. And I'm like, how? And she said, you made the hijab emoji. And I'm like, oh my goodness, is that how you know me? She's like, yes, it's meant so much to me. And we just like go on to have this conversation about how powerful being represented is. And I went to have lunch with her the week after, but it came to a point of realizing that alongside the millions of messages I've gotten from girls in Indonesia and girls in India, it's such an emotional, almost ethereal feeling to see the validation of, yes, I exist beyond the headlines of CNN about whether hijab is oppression or not. So it kind of makes my like daily experience a little bit more playful and a little bit more subtle. So, and the outcome of that is obviously like effective. I have people thanking me, and I'm like, don't thank me. I think it's something that's been long overdue. But I think that story definitely like rings true to my heart.
And so on my side, I think the one that probably most moved me was I worked on, this was actually a really hard technical proposal. Basically the thing that allows for interracial couples, and which is interesting because now you have mixed skin tone, 2 people, and also you have to like for one skin tone, it's 1 long press and you just get 5. Like what happens when you do 1 long press and you need to choose 2, you know, are you getting like 25? It was very complicated. And we worked on it with Tinder and Tinder was actually really interesting because they cared, because the introduction of online dating in a community, this is an academic paper, increases the rate of interracial marriages. So they really kind of like felt it and like went on this huge campaign. And so one of the people who worked, who co-authored the interracial couple emoji, so she's American Black, she married a man in India, and they live in London, and she said when she saw she could create an emoji that combined her and her husband and put it on the keyboard, she felt seen. I mean, she cried because she felt seen in way, and you know, it was not a marriage that was uncontroversial on both sides. So to have that emoji exist tells them they matter and their love matters. And you know, Tinder did a great job actually, like documenting people and, you know, creating all the kind of like wonderful YouTube videos that like large, you know, global brands can do. But it was really lovely to see people feel that their love could be expressed.
That's wonderful. Also, that sounds very complicated, technology. Okay, so
That's a lot of questions.
I've got a lot of questions. We're going to be here a long time. So some of these are briefer questions than others. Some are, you know, more factual questions. So I'm going to start with one that's pretty straightforward. How many emoji have been submitted or proposed by the public versus developed by the Unicode team?
Oh, that's a really, I mean, so I can't give hard numbers, but let me tell you sort of different stages. So 2007 to 2010, you have basically Unicode taking the emoji from all the different Japanese carriers and trying to sew them together and then integrate and then sort of introduce them. So that is your basis. And I used to know the number of that off the top of my head. I wouldn't say above, I know I should know this. It's above 500, less than 1,000. I think it's in 600 to 700. I bet you whoever, someone's gonna tweet and say it's wrong, but somewhere in that. So that's your core set, right? And so then at a certain point, anyone can propose, and you know, just within the Unicode world, some of the people who propose are also, you know, members within the Unicode committee. There at this point, let's say between 2,500 and 3,000 emoji when you take into account all the color combinations. And so the main thing that I will say, that this is why it wins, by the way, is because Katrina Parrott, who you saw the video of, did all the skin tones, and so that multiplied a lot of things by 5. And so in terms of like the impact that she has had on global communication as a single human, I think is probably one of the largest in the history of the world, I want to say. So by that definition, the many of them have come because of initiative by normal humans. At this point, I will say, and you guys will probably notice, that there was definitely a point in emoji land when anywhere between 30 and 70 emoji were being introduced each year. And Emoji Nation, for better or for worse, did a lot of those, so you have like bone emoji and, tooth emoji and like, sorry and arepa and all this. But now you will see it, very, very sharply. I think it'll be a long time before, or maybe ever, before we see many, many emoji appearing on a certain year. But what's really interesting this is what I thought was really interesting. The large tech companies really do care about emoji because it is why people update their operating system. That's true. So disproportionately, like people do not upgrade their operating system because, new sheet, like some obscure ancient Chinese dialect written form for women in one part of China. Like people do not update, but they will update because they want the hijab emoji or the dumpling emoji or now there's like funny, heart on fire emoji. Like there's a bunch of things like that. So they're motivated to make sure that there is some kind of cadence of emoji because for various security reasons, they want us to update our operating systems.
We'll take it.
Yeah.
Raf, excuse me. You fought for the hijab emoji at such a young age. What advice would you give to young teens who are also trying to make a positive impact or create change?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the way I got into this was with a lack of thinking, quote unquote. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but I think a lot of times because of young age, you kind of give yourself the crutch that, I'll figure it out later. But I think it's almost empowering to say, I'll do it, then I'll think. I'll do it, and then I'll figure out, sweat the details after. So I feel like that's kind of what was mobilizing for me, is I didn't really sweat the details in the beginning or try to analyze so much. So I feel like the first piece of advice is just do it and then think. Do it and then think. I think thinking is wonderful, but when you think too much, you stop yourself from doing a lot. So don't think, is my
good advice. Yeah. Figure it out as you go.
Exactly. That's a better way of putting it.
Are you guys working on any new emoji that you can tell us about?
It's top secret right now.
Maybe next year.
It's so hard because there's always emoji in the cycle, and I don't know what becomes public at when time. And I think I can say this, actually. How about this? There used to be a time when Unicode kind of updated much faster, when if you were an Apple user, your iOS emoji would land basically first week of November-ish. Then came COVID, that delayed a bunch of things, plus a bunch of other things, and now the cadence is much slower. And so we haven't even seen, as normal people, the next batch of emoji, but I will tell you what some of them are. Donkey,
Ooh.
in part because to get political parity with the elephant. That was one of so a lot of White House officials worked on it. I mean, now White House officials. They were not White House officials at the time, but these probably not uncorrelated that they worked on Donkey and now they're White House officials. So that is one. Fan, which I thought was interesting because the original proposal came in as an electric fan, and then now it's more of the folding fan, which I think is interesting. So wings is another one that is coming down the pipeline. Flute, I think a flute-ish type of thing is coming down the pipeline, but it's not that many, I have to say. You definitely feel the heavy curation of emoji, and there are people, quality over quantity, I think it is, yeah.
Okay, I have another straightforward one, which I had not occurred to me before, so I think this is a very interesting question. Has sign language been incorporated or represented in emoji?
So the answer to that sort of is yes. Or I think the question, did it impact it in any way? So there is a so this is public. So Apple many years ago did like a accessibility related set of emojis. So there is the cane, there is like a bionic arm, there's a bionic leg. There are 2 different kinds of wheelchairs. And in that set was one that basically means, I feel like it basically means like deaf or ASL, I think. And it was really interesting because it has a motion but it's an emoji, so there is no motion. And there's an interesting debate because not all sign languages have the same sign.
That's right. It's a lot of languages.
Yeah, and so there was sort of this. It's interesting to debate. Do you just encode a dominant sort of sign language versus like all the different kinds of sign languages have evolved in different countries and different languages and different geographies. So you will see it on the keyboard. And that was the end result of the debate. Like clearly that is kind of what it.
No, I think that's. I mean, that's such a complicated whole culture and disability to represent in a little tiny image. So that one seems particularly difficult. Goes back to your tooth. Maybe is easier to represent.
Yeah, so that one was sort of interesting. So I will say there has been, it's in the public record, but there is discussion around sign language and deafness in how it can be represented pictorially in a global curated language.
Yeah, I mean maybe it's not. Maybe it's part of another part of Unicode at that point. Okay, this one's from Zoom. In actual use, emojis may be interpreted in many different ways from the original meaning. Do you consider this when designing, and how do you avoid misunderstanding and misuse? You mentioned a bit of this with the chopsticks, but...
Yeah, well, I have a different example for the dumpling. It was really funny because I went to a lot of events, and one of the mom-to-be, she was pregnant. She's like, I've been using dumpling to refer to my baby, like my little dumpling, and I just thought it was the cutest thing. There's so many different ways of looking at, just like if you put the frog next to the tea, it's none of my business because it's frog drinking tea. So there's all kinds of different creative combinations. You can't really stop people. They gotta do what they gotta do.
And I don't know if I should bring this up because it's kind of negative, but I've seen the hijab emoji being used in warped ways. And I think, again, that goes to a lot of its political roots. But it's something you can't really control. I think there's always a double entendre for everything if you want it to be. But yeah, that's something that I hadn't thought about. But then once it was released, it's like, oh, is this how people are putting it together? It was upsetting to begin with, but I think it's a matter of like, okay, a fraction of people will use it this way. That's fine by me as long as the other millions are using it the way they want.
So I was told this is a PG program because it might be picked on television. So I'm trying to figure out how to do this. So I will say that we encoded, probably going to flip it around and say, so there was an emoji that was encoded that's this, which is pinch. And so we just thought it was meant pinch or small amount. And as soon as it hit, these are the emoji that are coming next year, there were headlines that gave it a completely different interpretation that I had and when I saw the headlines first, and I was like trying to figure out what emoji they could possibly be talking about, because it referred to like basically the male anatomy, and I was like, is it oyster? Like I really was like puzzled what it possibly could be, and then later on like looked and I was like, oh, that is not something that had ever occurred to me, in this whole debate. So that was interesting. That was slightly unexpected. I will say, yeah.
Sometimes you just don't know.
Never occurred to me, but like clearly occurred to all journalists like at the same
Immediately.
time. Yeah, immediately, yeah.
Well, maybe on the flip side of that, what emoji do you believe still need to be added?
I think the Aboriginal flag emoji, because I live in Australia for 13 years, and I'm kind of shocked to find out that Aborigines' flag is not represented. So I hope it's gonna be there soon.
So I will even I will tell you it's not going to be there soon, because at this point Unicode announced that they are not accepting any more flags of any sorts, precisely because it is a geopolitical area that they do not necessarily feel equipped to go into. And especially because it's just to give you some background on the flag emoji, they basically are mapped very strongly to the International Standards Organization and to the United Nations in terms of because it's less that the emojis for flags are pictorially represented. It's usually a flag plus a 2-letter country code that are determined in sort of areas, not Unicode. And then you get something very interesting, like the Aboriginal flag, which is officially recognized by the government of Australia, I think since 1995 or so. But there's no way of using the present system to encode it. And then you get into provinces. For some reason, we can debate Wales and Scotland and England have their flags, probably, if I were to guess, maybe to do with soccer, but then why are other not sub-regions? Then you have the whole thing should Tibet, right?
It's amazing the simplest question you ask becomes so much more complex as soon as you try to find the edges of it, right? And I think emoji really bring all those breaking points become very visible as soon as you a flag seems such a interestingly simple question.
Active debate. And I would say if there was ever a pressing way to come up with an alternative system outside Unicode for expressing things like emojis or non-emoji, it would probably be in the flag area. But that gets really tricky in many different ways. Also, historical flags, what do you do with the Soviet Union? Flag for the Confederacy. It's a very, very hairy area, actually.
I mean, I guess in a way a flag is an identity, right? And it is both a representation of an identity, but then of course there are so many identities represented by flags, so that it goes to that edge.
And the other thing is, per flag, their usage is very low. So they're very, they're not just in case you're wondering, smiley faces by far, and hearts. People love smiley faces and hearts. Literally 10% of all emoji transmitted in the world is a face with the tears of joy, 1 out of 10. And then beneath that, about 6-ish% is the red heart. I mean, just those two alone are basically 1 out of all 7 emoji transmitted at this point. And the flags, they have frequency data. They're not used that much, and then they're very complex. So I feel like there is definitely some parts of the world, I think, and it's been talked about that maybe flags weren't the best thing for Unicode to wander into, except they had to, because there were about 5 legacy flags that came from the Japanese system. So US, UK, Japan it is. So once you did that, you have to fill out the whole set. Yeah, they're very into filling out the set.
So this is an interesting question I think we got of, so what does it say that people don't feel seen or real unless they're in an emoji? And this is a question I think about phones and identities and technology, incorporated in culture and things like that. So, so on the flip side of, can't we exist without being emoji?
Well, I guess that's why we have telephones. Well, the thing is, I think one thing I love about emoji is it's so succinct, and a picture equals 1,000 words. It's not so much of a competing, it's just additional add-on of the way of communication. And if you think about people who are coming from different countries and who have very different language background, and when they have something that could actually represent their identity, which in a very unexpected way. Let's say dumpling, for example. I had no idea that, when I designed a dumpling emoji, I really didn't really think too much about how this could bring people together in a most unexpected way. Because when I was doing a presentation, I remember, in Toronto, Canada, and there was this young Asian Canadian guy came over to me. He said, "Thank you for be part of the creation of the dumpling emoji, because it's a way for the community to be seen." And that's where I realized that the power of visual language, and it transcends the linguistic barrier, and it transcends geographic location. And in a way, it's this very small and yet powerful way of quickly making an emotional connection, which I think personally is remarkable. And because also the modern technology made it available. Yeah, because back then, Nokia phone, it's black and white. We have these like emoticons, but now we have colors. That just adds additional dimension of communication. I don't think it's contradictory from traditional communication. I actually think it's just a new way, an additional pathway of expressing oneself.
I think the question to me sounds like it's asking, what does it say about us as people if we need emoji to feel seen? And I think the first thing it does is it validates the role of emoji as something important, whether that's arguable to a lot of people, but if there's tons of people on Twitter tweeting like, oh, where's this emoji, where's that emoji, it says something that having this emoji impacts some emotional feeling they have. So it does that thing for me in the beginning, but then it also on the other hand makes me question that if we didn't take the approach of using emoji as a form of representation, and we stuck with the legacy emoji, that also says something. Because if I am on my phone in Saudi Arabia, and I've never left Saudi Arabia, and all I see on my phone are yellow or white men, and it doesn't speak to me at all, that also says who gets to be represented in a sense. It's a difficult conversation. I remember one of the criticisms I got was, I think it was particular to this is, oh, I have a left freckle on my forehead, I want to be represented as well. But I think that's not the conversation we're having here. It's not about getting as minuscule as possible. It's about understanding that if you give space to something else, that opens the conversation about we need to give space to other people, or else, you know what I mean? It's a tricky one. It's a lot of push and pull. So, those are my first thoughts to it.
So I'll make a couple of observations. So one is, and this is an active but kind of subtle debate, that emoji are, I think by linguists' sensibilities, are not technically a language, because there's just missing a bunch of components that whatever, the defined things of what make for a language. That being said, if emoji are not a language, we need a new word to express this idea of a communication medium, written communication medium that may not actually literally be a language. So the next observation that I will make is that emoji are probably the first digitally native, not language, or whatever the other word we use is, because most written digital languages come from this form, which is we started speaking, then we started writing down whatever we spoke, whether or not it's through kanji or Hanzi or Arabic or Latin letters or whatever. So we've taken spoken language, taken into written form, and then Unicode then spent 30 or odd years taking those written forms and then coming up with an encoding process so that you can type Chinese on the keyboard, you can type Aramaic on the keyboard, and it's really interesting because they actually consider it an issue of human rights, whether or not your language can be preserved and communicated digitally. Because at a certain point, if you can't, then your language will slowly, most likely die. So at this point, there's a very much in kind of effort to sort of encode low resource languages. So that's one thing, and then but emoji are natively digital in the sense that they exploded with the touch screen, right? So for, there have been little, like, I don't know if you guys remember, like wingdings. And I mean, they're, if you go into Unicode, like, and you poke around, there are all kinds of digital like little black and white images. So there were two things that kind of like made emoji like kaboom. Like I almost feel like emoji were less invented than they were discovered as we've kind of evolved. And two things. So one, I think people love color in ways that are like so fascinating. And then the fact that you can do it by touch, right? I don't know if you guys ever try to like get an emoji on your computer keyboard. It's like, I forget, it's like these two buttons and then the key, I think thing, and then a thing pops up and then you have to look for it. So complicated, you don't want to do it. It's like such a pain. But the fact that we were able to use a touch keyboard to evoke these images and they are in color, like touched some primal sense in a human being that we did not know that we had. And so I think, I don't even remember what the original question was, but those are my observations sort of surrounding how emoji, where they sit in our gradual evolution of the ability to communicate between humans.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I love that, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, and how we've been in a conversation for so long about emoji is that emoji cross all languages. I mean, they are our most universal way of communicating globally. And that's incredible. And so I guess that's why identity matters, and that's why it matters to have us represented, because if we're doing this across languages, we need to all be there.
You can be literate in emoji without being literate in your native spoken tongue. And I have never been there, but I did remember reading an article about a train system in India where the way that they signed was 3 emoji, because rather than, in addition to also writing it, I think. So this idea is like the people who can read can at least recognize the 3 emoji for a specific stop.
Amazing. So this seems like a great question to kind of wrap up with. What do you think the future has in store for emoji or digital communication?
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Well, that's a big question.
It's a big question. That's
But
why
I do think, I mean, one of the things I'm very thankful for, because I've been using Adobe since I was like really little, is seeing more and more people to be able to express themselves through different means and different methodology. Like back in the days, I think being able to draw, and even now, creating an emoji is seemingly more difficult for people who does not know how to use the graphic application. But I gotta give some plugs here. But Adobe has Adobe Express, where more and more people, general publics, small business owners, they can create their own visual language. Actually, the word emoji has nothing to do with emotion. It just so happened it was a coincidence that the spelling sounds like emotion, like emoticon. Emoticon is coming from emotion, because it's emotion icon. Emoji, the actual pronunciation in Japanese, is supposed to be emoji. It's 3 kanji character, which is Japanese pronunciation of Chinese character. E means drawing. Moji means language. It's literally the drawing language or drawing characters. So I think that it's amazing to see more and more people are expressing themselves through the original black and white alphabet to a more like Memoji, Apple Memoji, for example, animated GIF, for example. People are able to use these new digital media using a mashup of photos and typography and creating animated TikTok videos. It become more human, and it become more interesting and inclusive. And that's the future. I think the future is, I love quoting Steve Jobs, technology alone is not enough. When you marry technology with humanity, with liberal arts, that's where you yield the results that makes the heart sing. So that's the future. I think emoji is a little doorway towards the future.
I think for me, I'm really interested in how I can continue to weave representation through technology. I think a really cool example of that I saw recently was On Pinterest, if you search black hairstyle or braids for black hair, it will not only show you pictures of black women with differentiation of hairstyles, it will give you the option to specify, I want a protective hairstyle, I want a box braid hairstyle, and that level of thoughtfulness afforded to a certain group through your platform is so interesting to me, is how can you, and that doesn't happen if it's only white people in the room, or it's only one people of a certain demographic in the room. It happens by opening your doors to other people and say like, hey, what is it that you need? How can I help you? So I think that's really what I'm interested in, is continuing to see where it's the missing gaps in technology to offer inclusivity in thoughtful ways that, you know, can only really be done by talking to people. So that's what I'm interested in.
So it depends if you're talking 5 years, 15 years, 50 years. I would say some kind of version of like digital, colorful, touch-based pictorial things are here to stay. Whether or not Unicode wants to be the bottleneck in that is probably up for grabs. I think there is probably more demand than can be funneled through this, you know, nonprofit organization based in Mountain View, California, just like we are. So I think, I don't know if another system is going to evolve. There have been different proposals. Actually, one of the more interesting ones that has died, but I thought was very interesting, was using something called QID, which is Wikipedia's system of numbering the concepts, so that they know that if something is connected in different languages, like the page for Barack Obama in English and in Arabic and Chinese are sort of linked through this thing called a QID number. I thought it was quite clever, and I don't necessarily know that everyone loved it. So that was it was a very interesting proposal. It is not probably going to be something that's going to be used in the near future, but I love the creativity that came from like using the Wikipedia numbering system. And the idea being that if you had a numbering system, you could send that number and you're like, oh, Eiffel Tower, right? And so then like you would just pull in you didn't necessarily have to have Unicode sit there and do Eiffel Tower, and they wouldn't anyway, because it's sort of like a historic landmark. But they would be like, oh, okay, at least I know that what you're trying to send is the Eiffel Tower. And you know, you can either grab an image that is the Eiffel Tower, or you can, you know, go out to other places that have drawn the Eiffel Tower or something like that. But the idea, of course, with encoding is with emoji, you're not sending pictures back and forth. You're sending ones and zeros that then map to a font, and that font is in the emoji font. And so the same idea is, can we send something that are ones and zeros back and forth that in the end sort of explode on the screen in some kind of colorful pictorial format? And the answer is there's still a lot of people thinking about it. It's a very hard problem.
Great. I love all those visions. We have a future of that is visually rich on our phones and internet, I think. So there is a tradition at the Computer History Museum of one word, to represent yourself in one word. So I'm going to ask.
Or advice. Was it advice?
I'm sorry to
Well,
give one word of advice. See, I've totally got this. So I'm going to ask everybody one at a time to give their one word of advice. I guess.
I think.
Either way. All right, Yiying.
Okay. My one word is possibilities.
Woo!
Oh, yes. My word is create. I think being in a constant state of creation is so rich for the mind, and I'm happiest when I'm creating. So forgetting the white noise of everything else and just sticking and creating is my advice.
Okay. My advice is mentor, and I'm in part because it gives you meaning in life, and it creates human connection, which is all very important. And I was very pleased to hear, perhaps, in the many, many hundreds of people who have given one-word advices, this may be the first time that they've seen the word mentor. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah, I know. I was originally going to go with like sleep, but I felt like that's like way too obvious. So I wanted to do something a little bit more offbeat. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. This has been a fantastic conversation.
It's been a great conversation. Join me in giving a warm thank you to Sarah, Jenny, Raouf, and Ian, again, on behalf of the Computerist Museum.